Hello and welcome again to Hack Your HazCom. It is day 2 of the EHS Summit here in lovely Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm pleased to have a wonderful guest here that I would love to introduce to you. This is Corrine Greenberg. She is an EHS manager and CHMM at Eckhart, America's Louisville facility. It's the oldest chemical manufacturing plant in the Rubbertown complex in the West Louisville, Kentucky area. She has been a credentials certified hazardous materials manager since 1995, and her 30-plus year career has included over 20 years as an in-house environmental or EHS manager for manufacturing facilities across a variety of sectors, as well as 11 years as an environmental consultant focused on industrial facility compliance, environmental management systems, and auditing. And for the past 11 years, she has been the environment lead or EHS manager at 3 different chemical manufacturing facilities. Some of the responsibilities she's been in charge of include PSM, RMP administration, and as well in her, looks like whatever free time you've got, you are also currently the vice chair of the Kentucky chapter of the Hazardous Materials Manager and the treasurer and workshop coordinator for the Kentucky chapter of the Air and Waste Management Association, as well as a board member and committee chair for the Louisville Regional Science and Engineering Fair. So, welcome. Thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
I'm glad to have you here. So, I understand there was a session that you put on today which involved an interesting take on hazard communication and what we do with plans, and I'd love to hear your take on what you did in the presentation, as well as I think this is very important for our listeners who have maybe a one frame of mind when you talk about hazard communication plans, but I think it would be beneficial. This is why I invited you today. So let's talk. Tell me about how it went today in your session.
So our session today was basically called When the Neighbors Needed to Know.
Mhm.
This LEPC, our local emergency planning committee here in Louisville, Kentucky, developed a public-facing HazCom course.
Sure.
And we subtitle it Sensitive Conversations with Sensitive Populations, because there's the HazCom that we all do at work for our work jobs and our work world, talking about the work chemicals in our workplaces. And when we do HazCom in those settings, it's a captive audience, but it's a voluntary audience, and they want to or they need to know about the hazards of the chemicals in the workplace. And there's this other group outside of our fence line who may want to know, but they have no idea where to go or who to ask or how to get that information. And then a lot of times they just imagine the worst because they don't have any other source of information. And what came to me was actually 2+ years ago, February 2023, when the East Palestine train derailment happened. And there was everybody was talking about for 2 solid weeks.
Mhm.
And the mainstream media, the broadcast media, the social media, it was everywhere. And the coverage was all over the board. There was lots of bias. But what struck me following the story, because, okay, I heard that there's a derailment. I heard what the chemical was. I looked it up. I found out what I could about this chemical, and I could surmise the rest. And I was watching the news stories. But at the same time, it was clear on social media and in the public that the public really was just filling in the gaps themselves, and they were projecting the worst.
Mhm.
Louisville is 200 and some odd river miles downstream the Ohio River from East Palestine, Ohio.
Okay.
And within a few days of the East Palestine incident, all the bottled water flew off the shelves in Louisville. I mean, you couldn't go to Kroger or Walmart or Target or anywhere. All the bottled water was gone. And I'm thinking, this is insane. This is something that happened 230 some odd miles upstream, plus 14 miles inland. And people were just presuming the worst because all they knew was that hazardous chemical was involved and the media was all over it. And so therefore they should react.
Sure.
And I went to our LEPC at its next meeting. We met 3 times a year, and we had a meeting. Actually, it was at the June meeting, June 2023. And I went to our LEPC. I said, we meet 3 times a year. And mostly what we do in the LEPC meetings is the facility representatives like myself get to know the emergency responders before they would respond to an emergency at my facility.
Mm-hmm.
And the emergency responders get to know the site reps before they would have to show up at my facility. That is, and it remains a key function of an LEPC. But if you keep meeting 3 times a year and you don't actually do anything, it becomes very short meetings with not a lot of content. Maybe we'll have a technical program to count as professional development.
Sure.
But I went to the June meeting that year. I said, can we do more?
Mm-hmm.
I said, we've even, a few years prior, we'd done a hazardous materials commodity flow study.
Okay.
And we said, what if there's a truck rollover or a train derailment in our community? And we said, we're the experts. We have this information. How can we position ourselves to be out there when the incident happens?
Sure.
How can we get people to come to us for our take and our insight and for just factual information? So we had already had that conversation, but it never went anywhere. After East Palestine, I went to the LEPC and said, look, in my workplace, we do HazCom training all the time. You can give me a 20-year-old kid on their first grown-up job, and maybe they've worked at a grocery store or whatever, but now they're going to be a career plant person. I have to take this 20-year-old person who has no experience, and I do HazCom training with them so that they can be safe in my workplace. And I'm starting with, moldable raw clay, and I'm making a mini hazmat manager out of them so they can go work safely in my plant. So it doesn't take a lot of background experience to do HazCom.
Right.
Our community members are pretty much cut from that same clay.
Mm-hmm.
What if we took the HazCom materials that we already have and just sort of turn it around and nuance it to something that is what they want to hear and what they need to hear, not dumb it down, just make it appropriate to that audience. So we're not talking about the specific chemicals at this specific facility. We're talking about the different kinds of chemicals that could be here, could be there, could be at that neighboring facility, could be on that rail line, could be on the highway. And let's talk about these with community members and let's get their questions. And so the LEPC approved the concept, green lighted it. We formed an ad hoc subcommittee. There were about 6 of us who were on the subcommittee. And I started with my HazCom slide deck because I do create all my own content for my own facilities HazCom training. I create it, I deliver it. It's site specific, but I know it really well.
Okay.
And I just sort of took that material, took out the site specific stuff and said, okay, these are the basics of hazardous chemicals communication.
Yeah.
And we massaged that, and we started with a 2-part course.
Okay.
It had to be in bite-sized bits. So we figured an hour is about the much we're going to have to put onto them. And we went back to the committee of the whole, and they said, keep going with it. And so then the subcommittee really dug in, and different subcommittee members said, well, we should talk about this, and we should talk about this, and we should talk about this, and all good things that we knew the community would like to hear.
Right.
Ended up being a 4-part course. Wow. We took it back to the LEPC at the next meeting and said, we have a 4-part course. It's pretty clean right now. We would like to beta test it. And so we basically encouraged other LEPC members to sign up for a beta test, other LEPC members' professional contacts. If you had somebody in your office or in your plant or in your circle of colleagues, get them to sign up for beta testing. Our local CHMM chapter, a lot of them beta tested it. A lot of people from the Air and Waste Management Association beta tested it. We had a lot of people from the Kentucky Department for Environmental Protection beta tested it for us. People from the Air District beta tested. So all a friendly audience. And we said, here's what we're going to do. We want your insights and your critique, and we want to hear from you how this sounds. In return, you can consider this 3 hours of free training. It's professional development,
Right.
So it's kind of give and take. We did the beta testing of the 4-part course twice. In both times, the feedback we got was, wow, that's a lot. It's good, but we think maybe it's too much. And some of them wanted to cut it closer to the quick than the
Right.
subcommittee members. Like, if you cut out this and this and this, that kind of defeats the whole purpose of having the course. You can't dumb it down.
Sure.
So we said, but we can refine it. We can trim it. We can focus.
Okay.
And so we did take out the parts, okay, maybe that's not directly relevant and maybe that is too much and they don't need to know that.
Sure.
We trimmed it to a 3-part course.
Okay.
The first part is a 1-hour session, the basics of hazardous chemicals. So we basically talk about what makes a chemical to be classified as hazardous. We talk about that there are physical hazards and health hazards, and a chemical can have some just physical, just health hazard, or some of each. We talk about the 4 broad categories of hazardous chemicals: flammables, corrosives, reactives, and toxins. And we said a chemical can have one or more, but we went into what each one of those terms meant. And then we talked about the effects of chemical hazards being acute or chronic. And
Now, let me ask you there. So these are technical terms, right, that
Yes.
we're all used to,
yes,
right? But bringing it to a different audience. And this is a very unique, different audience, right?
yes, it is.
So tell me more about that. How did you get to like describing what toxic is, right?
So we put a lot of effort for each one of those terms. Well, physical and hazard, that was one slide saying, first off, we introduced them to this concept that everything is made of chemicals.
Sure.
Everything that you can see, touch, everything around you, me, this
It's a
table,
chemical,
it's
right.
all made of chemicals.
Right.
So first off, there's the universe of chemicals. Inside of that, some chemicals are considered hazardous chemicals because they have a recognized hazard.
Sure.
And we had this graphic that looked like Russian nesting dolls. Inside of the hazardous chemicals, you can have some that are health hazards. Now, the difference between a physical hazard and a health hazard, we would say a physical hazard does something. You ask, what will it do?
Sure.
It's like when a tree falls in the forest. Will it make a sound? Of course it will, even if nobody's there to hear it.
Right.
So acetylene will burn. It's very flammable. There doesn't have to be a person around to get hurt by it, but acetylene will burn if it's
Regardless.
exposed to an ignition source. But sulfuric acid, that will corrode through steel. That's a physical hazard. But then if you get sulfuric acid on your skin, it will burn through you. So that's a health hazard. So now you have physical
the
hazards.
concepts.
Now we go into health hazards. And we talked about some other health hazards. We said asbestos. Asbestos actually has only fantastic physical properties. It's flame resistant, heat resistant. It's great insulating. It's chemically resistant, electrically non-conductive. All of its physical properties, the things it does are wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it makes people sick. So that's a health hazard. And specifically, it's a toxic health hazard. We explained that toxin means poison. Poison means toxic. The word toxic is way overused by the broadcast media because they think it sounds technical and scientific. And we tried to break down that and say toxin means poison. It's a very specific kind of hazard. Not every hazardous chemical is toxic, but all toxic chemicals are hazardous chemicals. So that's just another layer in our nesting dolls here. And then within the toxic chemicals, so then you can have carcinogens. Now, carcinogen is a specific kind of toxic that will cause cancer. So we've got this graphic with these concentric circles showing, and that's a couple slides right there. And then we talked about acute and chronic, and that some chemicals, are going to have an acute hazard. If you get sulfuric acid on your skin, you're going to know it right here, right now.
Right.
But if you're overexposed to formaldehyde, you may not notice it until you get, liver disease or kidney disease or cancer. So that's a very chronic effect. And so we introduced each of these concepts in turn. And that first session is pretty much a solid hour. I'd say the first 2/3, 3/4 of it is just these concepts.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that hour, we started to talk to our audience about where can you go to get more information about a specific chemical you're interested in. And we introduced them to safety data sheets, what they have, but also the limitations of them, because they are designed by a manufacturer for the workplace use of that chemical. So while it may have the information that I need to use it in my workplace, it may not have the information you're looking for from my public health interest. And then we talked about a better source might be the NIOSH Pocket Guide to Chemical Hazards. And we shared these web links with them. And we showed an entry from the NIOSH Pocket Guide. We used ethanol. Ethyl alcohol is a chemical that most people are familiar with.
Yeah.
And we talked about, this is what the NIOSH Guide will tell you about ethanol and all these physical properties. And we had to explain the properties and show. And that's a more complete in a certainly less biased source because it's from NIOSH, and we had to explain who NIOSH was. And then we concluded session 1 with an introduction to the emergency response guide, because we said a lot of the community members, using the example of East Palestine again, they want to know where can they get more information when something bad happens. And we shared the web link for the ERG, and we said, look, if you know either the name of the chemical, or if you can see a placard with a 4-digit number, you see that truck on the highway, look it up by name, look it up by number. It'll give you a 3-digit guide. You flip to the section of the guide, and boom, that gives you 2 pages of what you need to know in the event of emergency.
And you're showing them that snapshot of ethanol.
We're showing this on the screen, yeah.
Of course.
So you can look it up either way.
Okay.
And as an added bonus, at the conclusion of the whole 3-part course, we had already given them the website for the pocket guide, the website for the ERG, but we gave them a physical copy of the ERG. And at this point, by the time they completed the whole course, they loved that. They thought that we'd just given them the Holy Bible. I mean, they liked that they had this, that we trusted them with this, that we wanted them to have it, and that you could tell that was something they felt really cool.
I love
they
that.
had the emergency response guidebook and they knew how to use it.
Yes, you empowered them in that sense. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's session 1. It's a 3-part course.
Sure.
We've now done it with members of the general public 3 times.
Okay.
The first time we did it, it was at the May, June, and July meetings of our Rubbertown Community Advisory Council. Now, Rubbertown is this complex in West Louisville. It's 10 chemical plants. The plant I work at predates all the others by 13 years.
Okay.
My facility was built in 1929 as Reynolds Metals number 3. Now, you've heard of Reynolds Tobacco.
Sure.
Reynolds Tobacco made cigarettes back in, early 1900s. That was by the uncle. His nephew, also Reynolds, wanted to have a business. So the uncle said to the nephew, you can run the metals plants, and I need you to make aluminum foil to go into the cartons of cigarettes to keep the cigarettes dry. So that was the start of Reynolds Metals. It was related to, literally, the Reynolds Tobacco Company, but had a different mission and purpose. They were making tobacco. So the plant I work at was Reynolds Metals number 3. There are only 2 Reynolds Metals plants left in Jefferson County. And we're no longer affiliated with Reynolds Metals, but that's a history.
Sure.
So we were there. Fast forward to the dawn of World War II, and the U.S., could see the drumbeats of war. The U.S. knows they're getting drawn into World War II. And the Japanese are sitting over here on the Pacific Rim, sitting literally on 98% of the world's supply of natural latex rubber. And if you're going to go to war, and the person you're going to go to war with has all the rubber, because up to this point in history, rubber things are made of natural latex rubber, you're going to have to find a workaround. And the scientists had already figured out how to make synthetic rubber. They just hadn't scaled it up to an industrial scale.
Sure.
So they had to look around and find a place where can we build a rubber complex quickly with the right mix of materials. And it couldn't be on the East Coast because that was too close to the Germans.
Sure.
Couldn't be on the West Coast because that was too close to the Japanese. And so they looked around and they were looking in the middle of the country. They needed coal, they needed lime, which are the 2 raw ingredients for the very first building block to make acetylene. And because our plant already existed in this corner of West Louisville and Louisville, Kentucky, we already had electricity, we already had roads, we already had rail.
Infrastructure.
It was ready to build.
Sure.
And so they selected Louisville, Kentucky, the U.S. War Department, along with it was the National Synthetic Rubber Company, E.I. DuPont de Nemours, and one other. There's one other chemical company that eludes me right now. But all these investors came together and they built up this complex very quickly. And so they started building in 41. They finished building in 42. And for the duration of war, they were making synthetic rubber.
Okay.
And then in 1979, one more company was built down the road. So fast forward to the modern era, now this whole complex is operated by 10 different companies, 10 different plants. They were related at one point.
For the
and now
war
there's
effort.
10
right.
standalone companies.
Sure.
And you put that in the context of today's culture and society. Well, now we have an OSHA. Now we have an EPA. Now we have a DOT. Now we have community members who are becoming more aware and more educated And then there's the environmental justice issue too, because our corner of Louisville is not the high income area. It is very racially diverse. And so there's an environmental justice layer. So there's a lot of focus and spotlight on what we are doing over in Rubbertown. So the Rubbertown Community Advisory Council is our community advisory panel, our CAP. For the companies that were ACC members, the American Chemistry Council, they had an obligation 30 years ago to develop these community advisory panels. And so that's what we are. And even though my company is not an ACC company, we're an aluminum association company, but because we're in this complex, all 10 of the companies value this opportunity. So we all send our company reps and the interested community reps. That's where we engage them. This is the whole background.
That's fantastic.
So now that we've developed this public-facing HazCom course and we want to start rolling it out and showing it with real members of the public, that was kind of a friendly audience because we knew them already. I knew them. My other 9 chemical plant colleagues knew them, and they met regularly every month. So we broadcast it at the February meeting, at the March meeting, at the April meeting. We said, if you guys can come to all 3 meetings, May, June, July, it's important you try to make all 3 meetings because this content is going to be building on itself. If you miss one, the next session is going to be kind of heady.
Yeah.
And so we did the first hour at the May meeting. We did the second hour at the June meeting, and we did the third part at the July meeting. That was our first audience.
Okay.
We've since done it 2 more times with open to the public in general. Our local Metro Air Pollution Control District, they are in an interesting position because the community expects them, they expect the air district to be protecting the community from everything, everywhere, all at once. And the air district doesn't have an emergency response function.
Okay.
At best, if they are asked by an incident commander to come in and do air monitoring, they can do it. But the APCD doesn't really work in that emergency response space. They work in standards and regulations and permitting and enforcement. They work with routine, regular stuff. And even when upset conditions occur, they can deal with that.
Sure.
But they are not an emergency response agency.
Got it.
And it was in their best interest, in the air district's interest, to kind of welcome our little LEPC group. Says, well, look, we are not an emergency response agency, but these people are willing to talk to you about chemicals in the community. So APCD gave us their conference room. They were helping us to promote the course. And we did that public course 3 Friday mornings in July. And then we did it again 3 Monday evenings in August. And those were open to the public.
Sure.
We had over a dozen members each time.
Wow.
So we've done it 3 times now. Part 2 of the course.
Okay.
Part 2 is the hazards of air emissions. So once we've already given them the basic language to discuss flammables, corrosives, reactives, and toxins, then we bring them back and we say, okay, there are lots of concerns to have. Let's tackle them one at a time. So first we talked about routine permitted air emissions and different kinds of pollutants. And all of session 2, it starts off with different chemicals are regulated differently because they have different hazards. We've already told you those kinds of hazards. Take that to the next step. Different air pollutants are regulated differently because they have different hazards and where they are emitted. And so we go through routine emissions. And then we say, okay, now what if it's an accidental release? And now there's something in the air, and this is what you want to know.
Sure.
And we said, there are different kinds of accidental incidents. Your emergency responders are going to respond very differently if there's a release of a flammable chemical, which is most hazardous to the people right there responding to it. The people half a mile away aren't in so much danger.
Sure.
Or corrosive, which is even more immediate. Or a reactive or a toxin. And we had already shown them in the emergency response guide that there are regular, orange page guide numbers. But then if something is highlighted in green, it's a toxic inhalation hazard. We had already introduced that concept. We bring that back in session 2. And then we said, well, let's tease this out. What if there is a toxic inhalation hazard? And we were upfront. We said we'd already done this with the emergency response guide. But if this is released, this is what's going on. I said, they're going to be modeling the dispersion of the plume. They can use meteorology and the amount released or the anticipated amount released, and they'll do a model, and they can plot out where this is projected to be going, and it's in different zones. And we introduced the concept, just because hazardous substance is present doesn't mean it is harmful in the amount present. That's a concept we had introduced. We'd already introduced the dose makes the poison. And we were introducing this concept of the observable adverse effect levels. That there's this demarcation. And if you're beyond that line, you're outside of the toxic endpoint, you could be, we had this cartoon character, Noel, the no observed adverse effect level. And it's just this stick figure guy, and we said, Noel is exposed, but he doesn't have a toxic dose. He's not exposed enough to give him any adverse effect. But if there's got a neighbor just inside the line, let's call this guy Lowell. This is the guy with the lowest observable adverse effect. And we had a little cartoon character with his, head being kind of headachy. We showed them side by side with a line in between. And we said, they're both exposed, but Lowell's exposure is over the adverse effect level. He's feeling ill. Noel's exposure is not up to the adverse effect level. He has no effect. Okay. Then we started showing, after we've modeled it out, so we got these acute emergency guideline levels that in the event of a release like this, they're comparing the concentration, the airborne concentration, which can either be monitored or modeled. We're comparing these concentrations to these levels because decades of toxicological research have established that exposures at these different levels have these different effects. We introduced two more characters. So there's Noel out here feeling nothing, Lowell in here kind of illin'. And then we got this guy kind of huddled down on the ground. I said, this guy is in a bad way. This is an AEGL2 exposure. Basically, he's either might have a permanent injury from this exposure, or he's unable to self-rescue. He's just incapacitated right now. And then there's another guy, and we used a cartoon character inside a coffin. This guy's very close to the source. He's receiving a full brunt lethal exposure. He could be killed. So we had these guys lined up. You have Noel and Lowell and the guy on the ground and the guy in the coffin and then the source over here. And we're illustrating that the closer you are to the source, the higher the concentration and the higher the effect. The further away, the lower the concentration, the lower the dose. And you may be far enough away to have no effect. And then this is where we wrap up session 2. We take these guys, and we've talked about the modeling, and we put the guys in their respective zones, this colored, red, orange, yellow plume model. And then we introduce the concept of shelter in place. And the community members have heard of shelter in place. Nobody ever really explained when to use it. If my next door neighbor in Rubbertown has a 500-gallon release of sodium hydroxide, and we've gotten the phone alert that this happened, my reaction as a hazardous materials professional is, man, that sucks for them. I'm not going to be upset about it. I'm certainly not scared for me and my people, and I just feel really bad for my neighbor who's got a really big freaking mess to clean up.
All right.
But the neighbors don't have that concept.
Sure. All they know is something nasty.
Something chemical sounding was spilled.
Right.
We said, shelter in place is really only appropriate when you've got a toxic inhalation hazard. And this is something that's going to be poisonous as a cloud of gas at ambient temperature. And so this is the one specific time when shelter in place is really going to be called. And the whole concept of shelter in place is not to make it magically go from 55 to 0. It's to make it better than it was. So if you take the guy who would be dead and you had effectively sheltered him, maybe he's just going to be injured but survivable. Surviving is always better than dead.
Right.
You take the guy who is a huddled mass on the ground, if you could have gotten him in the shelter, maybe he's Lowell. Maybe he's got a headache, and then after the incident is over, he's going to be fine. Yeah. You could take Lowell, who if he's standing outside, he's not feeling too great. But if you got him inside and isolated his atmosphere, shut off his air conditioning and whatnot, he just waits it out. Okay, it was a little stuffy, but then he has no effect whatsoever.
Right.
And so we showed how shelter in place is appropriate for this one specific kind of chemical hazard, but it's the one that they're most afraid of. And because we showed them already in the emergency response guide, only these ones highlighted in green are these toxic inhalation hazards. So now we're giving them a context. Yes, sometimes these are the chemicals that could be released.
Right.
And in these circumstances, we have plans and procedures, and these are why we have these plans and procedures, because surviving is better than dead.
Mm-hmm.
But these other times, maybe we're not sheltering in place because maybe it's just a corrosive mess on the ground.
Sure.
Maybe it's a flammable that they have to get under control. But the hazard over here is not, it's not a hazard to you half a mile away.
Right. And hence the shelter in place,
Right.
the concept.
And then the third, so both of those, the basics of chemical hazard communication, that's an hour plus. If we really get them going and they start asking questions, we can't keep it to an hour. The second one with the air emissions and the catastrophic releases and the shelter in place and all that, that's an hour plus. Running between, I think the shortest we ever did was 58 minutes and the longest like an hour, 9 minutes.
Okay.
The third session is by design the shortest session.
Okay.
We call that our risk management session. And that one, we basically say, okay, facilities that have these chemicals, you know, we're all doing risk assessment. You know, that risk is the product of probability and severity. And you have to consider both. If something is highly improbable, it's not likely to happen at all, but has a very severe effect, you're going to consider it, but it's so improbable, you're not going to put a lot of resources there.
Sure.
Conversely, if something is incredibly likely, like rain, but the effect of having rain is going to be very low, you're not going to put a lot of resources there. You're hitting for the things that are probable enough that it's likely to happen and severe enough that that occurrence is going to have consequences. And that's where you put your resources and you manage toward those. We run them through. This is a question. I had been on because it took us 2 years to develop this content.
Oh, I can imagine, sure.
And during this time, I was on a monthly call. I'm just sitting there online as a participant, just listening with the West Jefferson County Community Task Force. And this is another community group, environmental advocacy group. And at this particular meeting, they had somebody from, I think it was somebody from the Metropolitan Sewer District talking about something. And the presenter for that meeting wasn't doing a great job. And I'm just sort of sitting there listening. And one of the community members pretty much just blurted out, so, you know, when these things happen, you know, do they even have a plan for this? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they don't know that we at the facility level have plans and plans and plans and plans and plans. So we introduce all the different kind of regulatory drivers that if you have petroleum over certain thresholds, you're going to have a spill prevention control countermeasures plan. If you have hazardous waste above certain levels, you're going to have a contingency plan. If you're subject to OSHA at all, you're going to have an emergency action plan. If you have these chemicals in storage, you can have a risk management plan and or maybe process safety management in place. And so we show all these different things that at the facility level are already being done.
Sure.
And then we show some of the community, the county level emergency operations plan. We show them, here's the website for that. And so we share that with them and we kind of bring it back full circle. And we talk about voluntary risk versus involuntary risk. We talk about, we show them, at the very first slide we show them on part number 1 was all these consumer products. We have like bicycle helmets and reusable shopping bags and surgical supplies and bicycles and paint and water bottles and all these things that everybody uses. We said, these are all made with chemicals. And that's how we start the conversation. The very last slide is we pull up that same slide of all these different things that they know and use. They know when they're made of chemicals. Say, look, these things are all made of chemicals. Some of these chemicals are hazardous, but hazards can be managed. Sure. If you know what the chemical is, you know the hazards of the chemical, you know how to manage the hazards of that chemical, and you do the thing that allows you to effectively manage that hazard, it's not dangerous. Right. It's a managed hazard. And we have at the top of the screen, we say, safety is not the absence of risk. It is the presence of control. And so we shown the community members all these different kinds of chemical hazards and that this does this and this does that. And if this happens, we do this.
Sure.
But we bring it back around and say, we can't guarantee that things aren't going to happen.
Right.
But we want you to know what questions to ask when these things do happen and what you can expect of us. Us being the facility reps or the transporters or the emergency responders,
all the parties involved. Yeah.
And so that's kind of.
Wow. Now I'm curious the questions that came up almost by each session with these community members. What kind of questions were you getting?
It varied by community members, and
Sure.
it was great to meet these individuals. Some were very well researched, and they were coming in critical and skeptical, and they came armed with notes.
Oh,
And
sure.
I loved having these people in the classroom because, ask me, at least ask me here. Don't accuse me in the newspaper.
Right. Because I've armed you with some knowledge here,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Then we had other community members who were really trying to just grasp we were feeding it to them from a fire hose, even breaking it over 3 sessions.
a
It was a
lot.
lot of information. And so they wanted to revisit, well, what about this or what about that?
Talk
And we had
about
to
this, yeah.
reintroduce some concepts. No, but the best ones were the ones who were very critical. We had an incident in our community, November of 2024, is the Givaudan color scents. They make
Fragrances,
made
right?
food colorings.
Oh, food coloring. Okay.
Caramel-based food colorings, like thing that goes into your brown cola
Oh,
to make
sure.
it brown.
Sure.
They had an incident, a catastrophic incident, 2 fatalities. They had a cooking vessel in their facility. That I was reading the reports. Technically, it had a pressure relief outfit, but it got plugged, and so it overpressurized, and it
Oh, wow.
overpressurized and blew to pieces.
Okay.
And 2 employees were killed by blunt force trauma. And the community is really freaked out by this. Of course, things that go boom are very, very scary. And we have a whole slide on things that go boom. And we said, not everything that goes boom is a chemical incident. I said, in this case, first off, what do we know? We know it's a food processing plant, so it's highly unlikely. I mean, they can still have hazardous chemicals at the facility, but they're not likely to have big bulk quantities of hazardous chemicals. So we can know that. I said, within the hour of the incident happening, the mayor and the fire chief had a press conference. I was watching this news. It happened at 4:30 in the afternoon. So I'm sitting there glued to my desk with several different browsers, watching several different news channels. And when the fire chief stepped up to the mic, and we discussed this in the class, I said, when the fire chief stepped up to the mic, he said, quote, "The air monitoring is clear."
Mhm.
He didn't say the air monitoring for chemical concerns are all within acceptable levels. He said it was clear, which means they couldn't detect anything anywhere. So I'm sitting at my desk. This is live news happening right now. It's like, okay, it's a food processing plant. I don't expect it to have a lot of chemicals. The air monitoring is clear. It means that they didn't detect any chemicals. And the third piece was one of my news channels had a traffic camera
Okay.
Like
a
showing footage
helicopter.
of this location. And you're watching it and there's nothing happening. And then you see this white poof and then nothing else.
Okay.
If there had been an explosion, which implies heat and fire, there would have been a smoke plume that would have continued. The fact that it went poof and then nothing means that they blew the building apart. And there was a whole lot of dust and then nothing. So the moral of this is that, if you can imagine what it could be, you don't have to jump to the worst case scenario. Let's look at the clues you have,
Right.
the clues that are given to you, the information that is given to you. And yeah, things that go boom are incredibly scary.
Sure.
And maybe have you shelter in place at the outset while they get their hands around it and try to figure out what's going on. But when they give the all clear, this is why, because they figured out it's not this, and or this is under control. And so.
Wow.
But we had community members who lived within the immediate vicinity of that incident who came to the course, and they wanted to talk about that. And we talked about it.
Okay.
We made it clear that it was a catastrophic incident, but not a hazmat incident. Not every catastrophic incident is a hazmat, and not every hazmat incident is catastrophic. The neighbor who had 500 pounds of sodium hydroxide, what a mess.
Yeah. Unfortunate,
But nobody has to get hurt
Sure.
because it's going to sit there until you put on your PPE and you go clean it up with the right tools, you know?
So, okay, so it sounds like what we try to do as communicators, right, is first of all, what are we communicating? Does the end user properly understand it? And can they act on it, right? Those, at least those three things. Do you feel like what you did with this would achieve that?
I think for the community members who came and were present for all three parts because they wanted to be, I think they did get enough. At least they all have my email address right now. They can ask me any question anytime. We had among our class members was the reporter for our local NPR affiliate, the one with the environmental beat.
Oh, nice. Okay.
She was in the class. So now I know that she has a better sense of what vocabulary to use so she can be more careful not to incite fear
With words
and
that
to
are-
use the appropriate terms to put the hazards of this event or that event in the right context. We also had the local Fox affiliate, WDRB, helped promote the course for us. And we did a 1.5-minute on-air segment, and she interviewed me, and this is right before we had the public event in July.
Okay.
And she said, wow, this sounds fascinating. I said, next time she said, when we're covering these stories, this would be great information to have. I said, the next time you're covering the story, you have my phone number. You can call me. And if I don't have the answer, I can point you to who does, because that's what the LEPC is. The LEPC is this collective of professionals representing the facilities and the responders and the regulators. And this whole group of us, this is what we do. We know about these things and we're prepared for these things. And even if it's not happening at my facility, I can take these clues. The fire chief is on the camera an hour after it happens, and I can put things together pretty quickly because I have this base knowledge, and so do my colleagues.
And get it to the right people who need it.
Right.
That's fantastic.
So part of it was to get the LEPC out there as, hey, look, we're not just a group that meets every few months to have snacks and listen to a technical presentation. We do that too.
Of course.
But come to us.
This is next level, though. This is why I think what you don't hear, even in the standard LEPC program and all of that, it's actually getting it out to the community. Like, when I think about Bhopal, India, right, and what happened there.
Yep.
Could you imagine if that community had been aware?
They had no idea.
They had no idea.
That was the catastrophe. And we even at the very, very beginning, we talk, after we get past everything is made of chemicals, the second slide is, we're calling this course hazard communication. And this is why. OSHA has this hazard communication standard. And in our workplaces, we have this training on day one. When we get a new hire in the door, whether they've been at chemical plants for the past 30 years or this is their first grown-up job, we're going to talk about the hazards of chemicals in the workplace because OSHA requires us to do so. We already have this content. We're ready to talk about it. Number two, the next slide after that is the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act in 1986, inspired by the Bhopal catastrophe. Basically is a U.S. obligation we put ourselves as community members have the right to know about the hazards of the chemicals in our community. That's why we have an LEPC. The LEPC was born out of EPCRA, which came in direct response to Bhopal.
Very good.
We do tier 2 reporting of our chemicals because of EPCRA, because of Bhopal. We have TRI reporting because of EPCRA, because of Bhopal. And when a facility has a release above a reportable quantity, we report that to the LEPC because of EPCRA, because of Bhopal.
Fantastic.
And so we start off, that's where we start. And then we say, okay, let's talk about these chemicals.
And you get to session 3 where you're getting the hard questions.
Right.
All that stuff.
Like I said, the first time when we get to session 3 with the Rubbertown Community Advisory Council, they were a very friendly audience and they were probably a bit overwhelmed.
Sure.
They weren't necessarily voluntary. They didn't come to it on their own. They were going to come to those meetings anyhow. When we did the August session, just last month, these were people who voluntarily brought themselves on a Monday evening, 3 Mondays from 6 to 7. And by the time we finished our 30 minutes of content, and we said, what questions do you have for us? Wow. They kept us for another hour.
Wow.
That session ran an hour and a half. And we're like, this is great. This is what we want. We want you to bring us the questions and give us the chance to answer them so that we know what we didn't tell you or what we can, do better with the next group
And they're
answer your
engaging.
questions.
They're engaging with what you're giving.
It was
them, right?
it was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So after you've done this a few times like you have, do you feel like this is something I think this could be benchmarked and offered all over the place? Like, why couldn't we bring this up to every community across the nation?
Here at the AHMP Hazmat Summit, we gave a presentation to our peers here, to the other hazardous materials managers, said, this is what our LEPC did. This is why we did it. This is how we did it. And this is what we did. Because I imagine the vast majority of my colleagues here are in their own LEPCs.
Of course.
And they're probably just meeting every few times a year and having snacks and watching a technical presentation. But this is something that is giving us a purpose as an LEPC. It's, part of the EPCRA mandate for LEPCs is to engage the community and the media. It's in there. Broadcast and print media is in EPCRA, and community members. And so we're living that mission now. And I encourage all of our colleagues to, if anybody here asked me, said, hey, can we borrow your slides? How do you discuss, physical hazards versus health hazards or whatever it is? I could share the slides. Some of them are going to have to be customized for their community.
Sure.
Some of them are universal.
Right.
I personally don't see a great need. We did discuss this at our last subcommittee meeting because some of our own colleagues, either they beta tested it or they sat in on one of the public sessions. They said, hey, can we have some of those training materials? We'd like to incorporate it into our own on-site training. I'm like, how is it hurting me for everybody else to have this information?
Sure,
If I can do it, if what I've got is more than what you've got and the slides I have will help you,
by all means.
I mean, that I don't get anything out of it by being selfish and saying, no, it's mine. I made it.
And to think about it again, the backbone of this was the HazCom standard.
HazCom,
right.
Yeah.
So, wow. So you've given a lot, and I'm so thankful that you were able to join me today. Any parting thoughts for our audience that you can think of here?
I mean, I came to this kind of late in my career. I'm 33 years in, and I've still got a good 10 years to go, I think. I remember early in my career, one job in particular, I was the whole EHS department. I had to do everything, including putting the SDSs in the binder and teaching the employees why they should care and what's on those SDSs. I did that with some level of success, maybe. Then shortly after, in the middle part of my career, I was at a facility and I was hired as the environmental engineer. Okay, that's cool. I'm going to do the air permits. I'm going to do the wastewater discharge. I'm going to do the hazardous waste. That's all cool. And they said, oh, and by the way, you're going to maintain the safety data sheet database for the whole facility.
Oh,
I'm like,
that's a hat and a half.
Oh my gosh. I really don't want to do that, because at that point in the middle of my career, I thought nobody really cares, I mean, I think I was probably the primary user of safety data sheets because I had to calculate air emissions,
And the reporting requirements, all that stuff.
It was not anything at that part of my career that I thought was a big priority.
Right.
I knew it had to be done. I acknowledged that and I admitted that, but it was not anything to be excited about. And then I had a moment a few years later. I started at a job and at this particular company, big company, big global company. And I was being hired as a senior environmental and PSM manager. And it was presumed that I knew a certain amount of stuff. And they said, okay, we have these computer-based training modules. You have to self-train on all these, and here's your checklist and tell us when you're all done. Okay, fun. And the module that they had identified as hazard communication, that was one of the first ones I did. I'm disciplined that way, okay? I'm new, hazard communication, play. I kid you not. This whole 13-slide PowerPoint was all about how to access their safety data sheets on their internal system. And my jaw dropped, and I said, God, if the people who assigned this training to me thinks that this is HazCom training. It's a good thing I know about the hazards of the chemicals in the workplace, but what about all these other employees here? If this is the extent of their HazCom training, I said, this is not acceptable.
No.
And I went to my plant manager, my brand new plant manager. I said, I have a problem. We have a problem. This is not HazCom training. I know better than this, but what about all these other people where this is all they were given? And so I said, I would like your permission and your support. I will make a HazCom training for this facility. And then once I get it all pulled together, we're going to have to retrain all of these people.
Sure.
And she said, oh, okay. Well, yeah, whatever you think, put it together. And I went back to the HazCom standard. And under 1910, 1200, there's a section on information and there's a section on training requirements. And if you highlight, if you cut to the bone, it's that the information that is required is this, 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 and this. And the training requirements are this, 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 and this. So I've got like 10 things on my piece of paper that I know I have to cover. And I took those 10 things plus what I knew about those things, and I put together a slide deck, and I was really proud of that. We retrained that whole workforce. And so then when I left that job a few years later, I took it with me and kind of customized it for the next plant.
Right.
And then I came to where I am now, and I did the same thing. So when this LEPC public-facing HazCom course opportunity came, I said, I've got the material.
Right. It's evolved accordingly,
I
right?
keep customizing it for this audience, and that audience. I'll cut out the site-specific stuff. I'll boost the starting from scratch stuff, and let's do it.
Yeah.
So,
And okay.
but I'm now a HazCom advocate. This is at this stage in my career, it has clicked with me that if I can do one thing right, I have to do this thing right, because everything else in my workplace builds off of my employees having a solid HazCom basis. Right. And
the foundational stuff that you do.
It's what it is. So
fantastic. Well, Corrine, again, so happy that you were able to join me today.
Thank you for having me.
And for more information about Corrine, absolutely visit the Hack Your HazCom site for more about contacting her. I'm sure, if this sparks some interest, I would love you to reach out to her. And as you heard, she's absolutely willing to talk this. And I'd love to see more integration of this approach, because this is ultimately why we communicate. And frankly, this is why I started this podcast, like to get into some in-depth, cool concepts here. And
this what we do as hazardous materials managers. It's
right.
Living our mission.
I'm so glad to hear that. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
You take care, and we'll have you on at another time.
Absolutely. Be my pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.